Governor Holcomb just announced there will be a mandatory mask mandate in Indiana starting July 27th. So I thought this would be an excellent chance for me to reach out to my friend Josh, who I consider an expert on government affairs, government legislation. He's just a true resource. And we did a video back when the emergency was declared about the shutdown orders, and it's very well received. So Josh, thank you for chatting with me again.
Thanks for having me, Marc. I always love talking with you, and I love the nice informative videos and radio pieces you put out.
Oh man, you're making me blush, dude. I appreciate that. Josh, so I texted you as soon as I heard that Governor Holcomb was doing a mask mandate, and I really want to ask you, number one, can he do this? Number two, is this something that the legislature envisioned when they granted him the emergency powers? So let's just start from there, man.
Well, if you don't mind, maybe it makes sense to sort of summarize what we understand his order will be. He's not actually issued the order, but telegraphed today, what is today, Wednesday, that he intends, effective Monday, July 27th, for an order to go into place that will require masks used statewide. There are some caveats. It applies to people 8 and older, when you're indoor, inside a business, transportation, or when you're outdoors and can't socially distance. It makes it required in schools for grades 3 and up, with some exceptions for like extracurricular activities, or for physical activities. And then there's other exceptions for medical purposes, strenuous activities, eating and drinking, that sort of thing. So we haven't seen the order itself and don't know all the specifics, and I'm sure the order is going to reference the statutes that it relies on for its authority. But that's what he telegraphed in his press conference today of what he expects. So as you note, I think the natural question that comes from that is, can he do it? And the short answer is probably yes, but there's a bit of a longer answer, and in some ways it gets to be a little academic. This is in a lot of ways a legislative function. As I think most of us know and remember from high school, we've got 3 different branches of government here in the state, much like we do at the federal level. And it's up to the state assembly to really pass laws that then goes on to the governor to sign those into power. And here we have the governor, by executive order, issuing what is in effect new legislation. So is that permissible? Typically, the answer is no. But what the state legislature has done is said, in these certain emergency situations, we're going to grant the governor pretty sweeping executive power. And he's declared that emergency because of the pandemic, and so he's exercising the power that was granted to him pursuant to the legislature. So most courts are going to say that's permissible. He's allowed to do that. There's a sufficient, reasonable basis for the legislature to delegate those powers. There is, however, what's called a non-delegation doctrine, and that's really the theory that one branch of government can't authorize another entity to exercise its own powers. And so if I was somebody who didn't like this executive order and really wanted to attack it, I think that would probably be one of the stronger ways to attack it. You can't say, well, where's your authority? Well, the governor's going to say, in an emergency, I have all of these various powers, and pretty sweeping, and the legislature very clearly authorizes me those powers, and I'm going to exercise it. So I think, under the law, he has that power. I think the constitutional issue really is, can the executive do something that is more legislative in nature? And we have all sorts of cases that have examined this from all sorts of different angles. I haven't looked in depth in a pandemic type situation, and I'm confident it hasn't been addressed for face masks. But I think when you look at the totality of those other cases, it's probably going to be a court's decision that yes, the governor can issue that in this sort of environment.
Josh, give us a concrete example of non-delegation doctrine in action. Something, obviously pandemics up in the air, but give us something that we can sink our teeth into, an actual example.
Well, here's a good example. The Congress looked at, as we started to develop more complex drugs, and our food system got more and more complex. We're buying food from other countries, other states, et cetera. They said, look, we can't legislate every type of drug issue or drug rule that may come up, or every type of food rule. So we're going to create a new branch of the executive branch called the Federal Drug Administration, the FDA. Or I'm sorry, the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA. And this is I'm using a federal example, but it applied to us here in Indiana. And so the FDA, in the FDA, the Congress empowers the executive branch to regulate food and drugs. So they'll come up with all sorts of rules that are really legislative in nature. Can they delegate those kind of rules? Well, the courts have looked at that and said, in effect, yes, they can. So, that's even in a non-emergency situation. So if you look at it later on and there's an emergency going on and the governor's issuing this sort of mandate, I have to think probably a court is going to be okay with that. But that's probably one of the more classic examples of the non-delegation doctrine, or I guess really where that's been allowed to happen.
That's a great example. And, take me back to admin law days. So making my brain hurt over here. In the media and the news, you hear a lot of people throwing fits about not being able to go to a store without a mask when the store has a mask mandate. Is there a constitutional right to go to a store without a mask?
Yeah, absolutely not. And, I think it's important when people get in these debates online, it's really important to try and separate what is legal and what is right, and I think people have this argument of, I should be allowed to do this all I want. Well, that's sort of the policymaker argument, and you can make that. But when you come to me as a lawyer and say, does a private business have the ability to set their own policies? The answer is absolutely yes. A classic example we hear bandied about a lot online is no shirt, no shoes, no service, right? And so people try and make the same analogy for the mask because of the pandemic we have going on. I think it's a decent analogy, but businesses have the right to set whatever parameters within certain bounds. I mean, we've said you can't exclude someone just because they're a man or just because they're black or white, but generally speaking, businesses have the right to decide what kind of baseline service they're going to provide and how you have to be appropriately dressed or what kind of safety precautions they want to make before you're able to patronize their business.
Dude, thank you so much, Josh. I appreciate this. And then if there's any zingers in the actual executive order, we might have to update this, but I appreciate your time, man. I really do. Thank you so much.
I appreciate you having me on, Mark. And I know that it's probably not the last we've heard of this. And in a state as big as ours, I have a feeling we'll have somebody test the waters of this constitutionally and file a lawsuit, certainly in other states too. So it'll be fun academically to see how that plays out from a legal perspective. But I have to think that the courts are ultimately going to say that the governor has sufficient executive power authority in the midst of this emergency.
And just wearing a mask. It's not like he's making people work against their will or anything crazy like that. So again, thank you so much, Josh. You have a great day.
I appreciate it, Mark. Thanks again.